I would like to ask Phyllis Bowman, our city recorder, for the roll call, please.
Counselor Beltz is excused. Counselor Carey,
Here.
Counselor Lopez, Counselor McKeel,
I'm here.
Counselor Oberst,
Yes.
Counselor Ridgway, Mayor Kuntz.
I am present. Counselor McKeel, would you lead us in the flag salute, please? Next item on our agenda is our consent calendars. So our meeting of January 21st, those minutes were included. Do we have any corrections or additions to the minutes?
Oh, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move to approve the consent calendar.
And
Second.
thank you, Counselor McKeel for the motion and Counselor Carey for the second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
And as we just learned in our public meeting law, all votes will now be recorded by name. No, but that's okay. I'm going to verify there were no nays because Phyllis would need to record that. So just to confirm, any nay votes. All right, thank you. That brings us to public comments. I'm going to first look at my communications director who's communicating that there are none. Very clear communication. Thank you, Saber Jewel. And Phyllis, do we have anyone online or submitting comments in advance?
Mayor Kuntz, we had no one in advance, and I don't believe there's any online.
All right. That brings us to our business agenda. And our first item of business is, in fact, the very exciting, I'd like to point out, very interesting presentation of our 23-24 financial statements and audit. We have a guest here this evening from our audit firm of Kuntz, Blasquez and Associates. And I will make my annual disclosure, Pete's heard this before, that I am in no way related to the Kuntz family members that founded the firm out of Albany. So, hi, how are you doing? And Susie, do you have any introduction here, or we'll invite Susie Marston, our finance director, up.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. I would like to introduce Peter Gelzer from our auditing firm Kuntz, Blasquez and Associates to present the audited financial statements for fiscal year 23-24.
Well, thank you for having me again for our annual visit. In general, the audited financials were very clean and very well organized. We can talk about the financial part of it. I would say overall the city seems to be in good financial health. There were a little more expenses this year than the prior year, but that is the world we live in more than anything else, I think. The financials also have the bulk of the fixed capital asset costs related to this building in them as well. So that's the main change, is that you'll see a lot more capital asset numbers. The other part was we had, for the first time in a while, enough federal expenditures that we had to have a single audit, which tends to just mean that we have to focus a little more on those expenditures. There was no findings or concerns related to those monies, but that's what we did. In terms of the findings, they are very similar to last year, except I would strongly point out that the grant issues are getting much cleaner. Whereas before, last year, we're really in November kind of going through all the grant funding. This year, it was more of making sure that things were updated more timely. So I think we're on the right track. I have no real concerns about them other than it's just important with grants especially to kind of make sure that, you know, you really know which money is recorded in each fiscal year. And so that's really what the intent there with that comment is just to really keep track of that money. There's a lot of grants the city has, you know, the trolleys and everything else. So it's important just to recognize that in the right fiscal year. The other finding was, again, very similar to last year. And I will point out that from my point of view, it's not an issue at all. The fact that we are writing the financials, this book of 100 pages or whatever it is, there's a lot of new requirements for that financials. And the fact that staff does not necessarily seem like they could write the entire thing is not a concern. But because we're doing a little bit of self-review from our firm, it's a risk. And so that's why it will be in the letter. So those were the only two issues that even made it to the letter. So as I said, everything is looking good. I mean, I can go into details on the financials. I can go into more details on internal controls. I'll leave it up to you which direction to go, if any.
All right. So I know this is my fun for me, not so much fun for everybody else. Since this is last night, I was sitting at that table presenting to the school board. So I've have gone through this all very recently. I just want to point out as you go through this, counselors, and this isn't our only opportunity to ask questions. You know, we certainly can come up with others. There are a few sort of things you really want to look at that might be meaningful. And one of those is actually prepared by our staff, and that is the management's discussion and analysis, because that part of the financial statements is our opportunity, the city's opportunity to explain things that may change our financial statements or affect our financial statements. They're things that we can sort of give an overview and talk about what we see as the financial health of the city. So that's something you might want to focus on. And then, as Peter mentioned, there are opportunities throughout. They are the letters that are addressed to us as the governing body. And of course, those things, there's a lot of pro forma language in there, and that may or may not make a lot of sense, but those are where they directly communicate to us about things that they are required to do, either for Oregon state regulations, for, as he mentioned, federal government reporting on large federal expenditures, and then basically looking at sort of the other things that are in the standards that are set up for government accounting. So they compare us to all those things, and it's a pretty arduous process, both for the city to prepare and for our auditors to go through. But then I think probably the big thing to point your attention to is on the audit pages 132 through 134, or in our packet it's pages 172 through 174. And that is really just the findings, a summary of findings, right? So it has their results of various things and the actual findings that are mentioned, as well as corrective actions. So if that's something that you have looked at or want to look at and ask questions about, that's part of our responsibility, right? To say these were things they found that were either considered material, meaningful, right? There could be mistakes found that are very minor. That's not considered material, right? So you overlook those things happen. But deciding what is material weaknesses and significant deficiencies, and those sound bad, and in some cases they're really not that bad. So I'd also like to point out there that in a couple of places, both for our financial statements and federal awards, the auditor's report opinion is unmodified. That sounds kind of mediocre, but that's their best thing they can do, right? Is that right, Pete? Is that how you
Yes,
describe it?
that is absolutely correct. And thank you for translating. I appreciate that. So yes, I would agree. Unmodified opinion in auditor speak is everything looks good. That's really what it is. So yes, we have a lot of terms in there that we're required to. GASB, or the Government Accounting Standard Board, has a lot of requirements, and that's what makes this such a big document. And they keep adding to them. Compensated absence is the next thing we have to look at in the future. So they want to give us job security, I guess, is really what it comes down to. I would prefer that you didn't make any changes. I think it's more than enough, but yes, I would agree. Yeah, it's unmodified, which everything is good. And there was no even material findings. They were all just significant, which is the second level down.
So that's just sort of my point. Counselor Oberst, your mic is still on if you want to, just in case a couple people want to jump in here. So other questions or comments? Counselor Carey.
To your comments, Mayor Coons, the on page 133 and 134, are those the issues that we dealt with last meeting and they filed the corrective measures with Secretary of State?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So that field has been plowed. We don't need to go back to that one. That's good. And by the way,
I just will point out, you'll note that that section in the audit report also has prior years, because each audit, they'll show what was your prior year findings as well as then the new ones. So that's why it looks a little bit.
And you won't
more.
see that every year in the financials themselves. This is only because of the federal single audit that we had to conduct. So next year, when you don't have that expenditure, that section will go away.
after having read all of this, as much of it as I could digest and get through, I have to say, Peter, I was looking forward to hearing you talk about it because that was going to liven the whole thing up. So thank you. I do have one question, though, and it's on page 8 of the audit.
Okay.
And it's at the bottom of that page. And I fought my way through all of the definitions and all of that. And, you know, the city's net position is identified as significantly better using that term, those terms. But it says the increase occurred in part due to the increase in payments and transfers from business-like activities, which I believe I read as our enterprise funds, to the governmental activities and an increase in program revenues. What kind of large and significant transfers came from our enterprise funds increasingly to our general fund activities?
So your enterprise funds are used, I mean, part of it is they're paying for the services that your government is paying. So your utilities will pay for services that the financial department does, everyone else has been doing.
Sure.
And so there's transfers that occur in the budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're somewhat called support service payments rather than transfers, but the principle is the same, that they are, your utilities are paying for some government services. And so that those funds increase your net position in the government.
I didn't recognize, I mean, that happens every year. That's not new.
Right.
And the fact that it was called out as a significant increase, and I just didn't remember it occurring quite that way. I'm not disputing it. I'm just,
Okay. Well, as Susie just pointed out, there's also a lot of city hall transfers for this building
Yeah.
that were transferred out too.
but would that be considered the business-like activities?
So the transfer came from the Urban Renewal Fund to help support the City Hall project, and that was over $1 million.
And that would be considered a non-governmental, business-type activities. I mean, that would do it if that's the definition of the urban renewal.
Well, let me look at get further into the details here. So if you look on page 10, so the urban renewal, though, is a governmental fund, so I'm not sure it would be here. So you can see down towards the bottom, the fourth row from the bottom, there's transfer and support services. So in this current year, there was $2.5 million moved from the utilities, the enterprise funds, to the governmental funds. So that increased by a couple $100,000. So that contributed to that position, but you're right, it may be that there's more to the story than just that increased the net position.
Yeah, as I say, I just didn't recall there being, and I recognize that at 200,000, that's not 1.1 million. So, again, I don't want to make more of it than there is, but I was a little perplexed by that, and it's sort of stuck out in my mind that
Right.
seems a little rich for that much, and
Yeah. So if you notice, the line is actually an increase in business life activity transfers and also an increase in program revenues. So if you look at the revenues for the general fund, going back again to that page 10, you can see that program revenues went up by 300,000 and taxes and general revenues went up by 700,000. So those three items together is really the change of net position.
thank you. That I can see that, and I understand your train of thought there. I think we will all be glad when we finally expend all of the COVID grant dollars and the complicated mosaic that funding of this building was, and get back to sort of the normal, regular run of the mill things with occasional grants that are easily understood. So, well, I think we're all looking forward to that.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you, Peter, for the explanation.
Sure.
Other questions? All right. And that does that. There's no action this evening on this. This is to give us the opportunity to ask questions of our auditor and understand the process a little bit better. Oh, yep, and Rochelle.
Sorry, Mayor, we are actually asking for an action to approve the June 30th, 2024 City of Monmouth financial report as presented.
All right, there we go. And that included the Urban Renewal Agency information, right? Because we're not doing a separate meeting for that. Okay. All right, so a motion is proposed.
Madam Mayor, I move approval of the June 30, 2024 City of Monmouth financial report as presented.
I would second that.
Thank you, Counselor Lopez for the motion and Counselor Oberst for the second. I'm again going to ask for a voice vote. And all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
And any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for coming out this evening, Peter. And that does take us to our second item, which is actually our second quarter FY 24-25 financial report. So staying in the finance mode.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, City Council. Susie Marston, for the record, I'm the Finance Director for the city. Here tonight to go over the second quarter financial report that was provided in your packet. Things for the second quarter are primarily positive across all funds. I don't see any concerns at this point. For being halfway through the year, revenues are on target and in some cases are slightly more than budget. There are some where revenues are lagging a bit, and that can be attributable to the timing of receiving payments. Examples are payments that we get on a quarterly basis, like the local marijuana tax revenue. Our October through December payment actually came to us in January, and the same can be true for franchise fees. Expenditures across all funds are tracking with or are under budget. There are some larger items that were booked to the management and finance department during the second quarter, and this is in our general fund, which puts us slightly ahead. But that is due to the change in our ARPA spending plan that we did a couple of months ago. So there are larger purchases in there, or larger expenses for the purchase of the hearing loop system in this room, an upgrade to the council audio system. We just had the audible fire alarm system installed. That finished up last week. And we used ARPA funding also to complete the furnishings of this building and added new furniture you may have noticed in the lobby. So later on, I'll be bringing a supplemental budget to make those budget adjustments to even things out there in the general fund. You remember we started charging the public safety fee in October. And so the revenue that was generated from that is right on track with what we projected when we were developing the fee. For the second quarter, there was 126,000 generated. And of that, we collected 5,100, which we sent to Polk County Resource Center to administer the assistance program. For the second quarter, we didn't have anybody utilize that, and I think we may have had one in January who's utilized that. For the next quarter, the third quarter, I'll be able to show you the costs that are offsetting the public safety fee, because those costs, like the restoration of the community service officer, Officer 15, those are all starting January 1st. So that'll be in the third quarter report. For capital projects, you'll notice in your report, there's too many projects to put on one pie chart. It gets really hard to read. So I broke it down. And with what I did, you can see that 80% of our capital projects are public works projects, 14% are power and light, and 6% are the general fund projects, mainly what I listed out loud. So there's a chart for each department showing the breakdown, and there's project highlights and status updates in each of those areas. Interest rates have been on the decline since September, which we anticipated when we put the budget together. Up until this quarter, I've been reporting that our interest earnings are ahead of where we were the previous year. But now with the decline, we're right in line with where we were at last year. To date, we've collected $538,000 of interest earnings. Last year was $532,000. So I would expect with the continued decline, it's just going to become less, which we did plan for when we budgeted. So in conclusion, I would say that the financial position of the city looks good. Revenues and expenditures are on track, particularly for the general fund. We just started the budget process and staff is just beginning to work on budget projections to June 30th. So you'll remember from last year, when we get more into that process and finish it, we'll have a better idea in the third quarter of where we're going to end this year and be able to compare it with what we projected when we were developing the budget last year. So overall, I think it's a positive report for the second quarter. That's all I have. So I am open to answering questions.
Counselor Carey?
I have three. You mentioned the collection of the public safety fund and the fact that we shipped $5,118 of the Polk FCO, and little of that was spent. I'm assuming that there's going to be a fund there that's going to accumulate, and so at some point there'll be more than what may be needed, but it ought to stay there. And this isn't maybe for you, but I guess I wonder what kind of promotion we've done, so people are aware of that. It's kind of a rhetorical, as a finance person, you may not know that, but, if we're not getting the word out, if people aren't using it, maybe it's because we're not getting the word out, I guess is the deal.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know that I know the answer to
Yeah,
that question.
sure.
Maybe it's because there's not ample notice out there, and we could work with Polk County Resource Center to, get the word out a little better, because it's a program that they're administrating, but we can communicate it at the counter if somebody is struggling or asks for assistance, which we do. Yeah, but.
Well, it was an intentional inclusion into that whole public safety fee, and so as to not, provide undue strain on lower income families. So maybe we just ought to make that as it's sort of a goal to get the word out a little bit more. I'm not sure how to do that, but we can do that. And the marijuana tax, and I assumed that we're at 12.8% right now of anticipated. And I'm not surprised that it didn't show on time or, any of that, but that seems to be quite a ways down. Are we going to recover that? You got any eyeball,
Yeah.
back of the napkin, look at that?
Yeah, we're going to have to take a look at that. So in January, we did receive the second quarter payment. It was $18,000. So if that had been included in these numbers, we'd be at 31% of the budget.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to keep an eye on it. It's expected that marijuana tax revenue is going to be down, which we budgeted for, but maybe we didn't,
Sure.
go low enough. But having said that, I will say that the general fund revenues overall are where we should be at this year. So I guess I don't have any real concerns. But, we'll have a better idea in the third quarter.
Sure. If that hit and the other revenues are up, then we begin to build back a little bit of our cushion that we once had. And the last thing for me is on page 219 of our packet, and the sewer, water, and the narrative, sewer, water, and stormwater. In the sewer fund, the city has not issued debt as budgeted, which gives the appearance of revenues being beyond budget. Do we intend to do that, or is that a project that's going to be, put off for a year?
So we anticipated borrowing $1 million towards a sewer project, but we're looking at alternative funding sources
Okay.
possibly for that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
The project may still go forward, or it'll just be another fund source.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Carey. Other questions? Quite thorough, so I understand we're even taking their time on this, but yeah, thank you. And the graphics are very nice, so we appreciate that this is something that we can share and obviously increases our financial and fiscal transparency in our community. And we know that should community members see it and want more information, there'll be somebody who can answer their questions. So, yep. All righty. And there is no motion for this one. So
Right.
thank you so much, Susie, for all of that. And that still takes us to a budget adjustment. So one more for you.
Thank you, Mayor. The next item I'm here to present is a supplemental budget. It's resolution number 2005. You'll remember in December, the city was awarded an EDA grant of $80,000 to be used on a feasibility study for a year-round indoor BIPOC farmers market. On December 17th, the council gave authorization for staff to move forward to enter into an agreement and to accept the award. So we could potentially have this money coming in, which we did not know at the time we put the budget together for 24-25. This does affect the Economic Development Fund, and it changes the fund by more than 10%, which requires a public notice to be published, which was published in the IO on January 29th. So I'm sure most of you or all of you are aware of the executive's order to put a freeze on federal funding. That's just kind of in limbo. We did choose to move forward with this supplemental budget because we felt it's an administrative action in response to council direction. And depending on what happens with the executive order, whether we get the money or not, we'll still have it in the budget to deal with it if it comes to us. So, any questions?
And what we're actually authorizing is more expenditure authority, but we know that they will not expend that unless we get the revenue.
Right.
So,
Right.
so I think I feel confident in trusting that that will be the case. All right, any questions? Sure, go ahead, Counselor Ridgway.
Thank you. Are you in a position to answer questions about the specific grant? I know this has already been voted on 2 months ago in December. Or is this just about the financial impact of that grant?
So this deals more with the financial piece of the grant. This is just making it so we, if we receive the $80,000 with this supplemental budget, it gives us legal authority to spend it on the feasibility study.
Okay. My concern was, I guess, more of a legal question of whether in fact we were able to legally accept funds based on our sections in our Oregon Constitution, as it can be. Well, let me just reference a couple things. In December, and this is going back to the background statement that was describing the grant, it states the feasibility study will identify how to better provide access to locally grown food in economically distressed communities and provide capacity building resources to BIPOC farmers and producers, businesses in Polk County, Oregon. It specifically mentions a couple of groups.
And Counselor Ridgway, so because this is the finance report, it's kind of difficult. I mean, she can't answer the questions. I'm also going to suggest, because we did had that discussion, that we've authorized the grant application. The grant application's been made. I'm sure our attorney would have let us know if it was an unconstitutional action. In fact, probably the Council of Governments wouldn't have been, advertising it. So maybe for this time, because it did happen prior to your time on council, if you'd like to meet with the city manager and attorney to ask those questions or find out about for future information.
Certainly, and I'd just like to cite the article on the record that under Oregon Constitution, Article 1, Section 20, no law shall be passed granting to any citizen or class of citizens any privileges or immunities which, upon the same terms, shall not equally belong to all citizens.
Okay.
For that reason, I can't support it. So I just wanted
Okay.
to make sure that was on the record.
This wasn't a law, this was a grant.
Correct.
This would be funding, and certainly there's lots of funding based on those things. So,
Yes.
Councillor Karen?
I was not here for the actual discussion and the vote on that. I did read the minutes very carefully. And we'll have some questions when we receive the recommendation from the consultant. I guess the one question that we may or may not know, if we get a recommendation from the consultant, then it'll be our choice as to whether to accept and act on the recommendation at that time. And we don't have any idea what the recommendation will be. So there's another step to go and another discussion to be had, it seems to me. This really is just a matter of making Susie's life easy and getting getting the budget changed around. And there'll be substantive, I would imagine, discussions once we get engaged with the consultant and the feasibility study.
Right.
Yeah.
Those conversations will be with Community and Economic Development who brought forward the grant request. So, yep, we will definitely have that. But your information is noted, and as I said, Councillor Ridgway, I'm sure that either Lane Shetterly or Rochelle will be glad to kind of review what their interpretation is of why this is.
If I may just briefly, yeah, the receipt of grant funds doesn't implicate Article 1, Section 20.
Pardon me,
The
sorry.
receipt of grant funds for a feasibility study doesn't implicate Article 1, Section 20.
Okay, thank you. Why, we have our attorney right here. All right, so that does take us to a motion about the budget adjustment is required.
Madam Mayor, I would move adoption of Resolution 2005, a resolution adopting a supplemental budget for fiscal year 24-25 and directing the finance director to make appropriate entries.
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Oberst for the motion and Councillor Lopez for the second. And this is a resolution, so I will ask Phyllis for the roll call, please.
Councillor Oberst,
Yes.
Councillor Carey,
Aye.
Councillor McKeel,
Yes.
Councillor Lopez,
Aye.
Councillor Ridgway.
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Susie, for all
Thank
of
you.
those. And that does bring us to our new recent favorite topic, of which we were able to make a joke, actually, recently. This came up in conversation. So that would be our second reading and adoption of an ordinance regarding illicit stormwater discharge. And I see our Public Works guru here. Tonight we get Mark Landau. So Mark, you want to remind us where we are on this and we can move forward.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council, for giving me this time. I'm Mark Landau, Operations Manager down at Public Works. City Council reviewed the proposed ordinance during the January 7th council work session and suggested some minor changes shown in attachment 2. During their January 21st meeting, City Council conducted the first reading of the ordinance 1419 containing the requested modifications.
All right, last chance for questions about illicit discharge of stormwater.
So what the final product here is, we've got attachment number 2. That was just so we could see the red line. And we've moved all that into, what, 13.64, I think it is? Yeah, yeah. So that just cleans it up, cleans the document up. Considerable discussion's been had on 2 occasions on this. So I think that it's well done. And I will get to a motion in a minute, if you're ready for that, Madam Mayor.
I am.
Okay, then I move to conduct the second reading and adopt ordinance 1419, an ordinance relating to illegal stormwater discharges and illicit stormwater and connections, and adding new provisions of the Monmouth City Code.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Counselor Carey for the motion and Counselor McKeel for the second. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I will ask Phyllis. Oh, yep, go ahead, Counselor Ridgway.
Just in looking over this, I noticed most, if not all of it, was adopted from both federal and state authorities. Maybe more of a procedural question, but if either one of those authorities were to change their interpretation or their requirements for us, how would we respond? Would that necessitate us taking action, or would this remain in place?
Lane Shetterly, our city
You are?
attorney.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, yeah, that really depends on what those changes would be. If there are changes that would create an inconsistency with the ordinance, we would need to amend the ordinance. Hopefully, if they're going to do that, they would give us some model ordinance language, as they have given us this model ordinance language. So it really does depend on the nature of the change.
Thank you.
Yep, good question. It certainly happens to us all the time. So you're absolutely right. That's why we have things like the League of Working Cities and our attorney and their listserv to keep track of all that stuff. So, all right, anything else? All right, I will ask Phyllis Bowman for the roll call, please, for the second reading and adoption of ordinance 1419.
Counselor Ridgway,
Aye.
Counselor Oberst,
Yes.
Counselor McKeel,
Yes.
Counselor Lopez,
Aye.
Counselor Carey.
All right.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thanks, and thanks, Mark, for standing in tonight on that. I'm glad everybody got a piece of talking to us about that one. So. All righty, and that was our business agenda for this evening. So that brings us to our reports. And I have just a couple of brief things. I want to mention that we were actually yesterday, City Manager Roden and I were involved in a conversation that is starting with SEDCOR and our Council of Governments regarding housing and housing availability, particularly workforce housing. SEDCOR was the convener for a project that has sort of become a pilot for bringing major community employers and community leaders together to actually, in Yamhill County, bring some innovative design and build partners to build what will become a cottage cluster. And it will be basically designed to help these employers find and keep their workforce. So because of that pilot project, the Council of Governments and SEDCOR are working in all three of the counties they both serve, which are Yamhill, Marion, and Polk. This is sort of the kickoff to Polk County conversations, and this will culminate in a housing summit in April. And just sort of inspiring to hear some of the different ideas that they're bringing forward, different ways that local governments and employers and developers can partner on these things. So that was a great conversation that you'll be hearing a little bit more about that I was involved in. So that will bring us to reports of boards and commissions. And so if we've got anything on that, Councillor McKeel.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to make my first report of the Historic Commission meeting. We had it on January 28th. The commission elected their officers, Nita Wilson as chair and Ron Woodruff as vice chair. And it was actually kind of really interesting at the beginning of the meeting. The commission is working on the historic context statement. And actually to provide some context for that, the goals of the statement is to create a broader understanding of the historic properties in Monmouth's Southwest neighborhood and to define the priorities for potential future survey work and research information regarding the historic cherry trees orchard within the neighborhood, and also gain a broader understanding of potential National Register eligible properties. And what I found was really interesting is that this historic neighborhood, the houses were built in the 1950s and 60s. And I guess this is a good meeting for commission for me to be on because that's when I was born. So I am now historic, and we have it right here in our document. Actually, what's kind of fun is when completed, the statement will help us develop the architectural guidelines to maintain the historic character of the neighborhood. And people should kind of watch for a future meeting, probably during the Historic Preservation Month the Historic Preservation Month in May. And the Historic Commission will be holding a public meeting to present the statement. But also during the Historic Preservation Month, the Commission's going to have a day of all kinds of activities, including they're planning on interviews with our senior residents and historic people. Yeah, that was just, I tried to get that in one more time. And possibly a walking tour of our historic neighborhood. So you'll want to watch, the date isn't set yet, but you're going to definitely want to watch for that date. Last update, we had an update on the Ross Theater restoration. The progress is going to be done on the outside of the building by April, and then they'll start working on the inside of the building. So it's starting to look pretty good with that. And our next meeting is Tuesday, February 25th at 6 p.m. right here in City Hall in the executive conference room back there. Thank you.
Awesome. Other reports, boards, or commissions? Councillor Obert?
So I was unable to attend my first senior center board meeting, I'm sorry to say. However, I would note that we have a new bus. Yeah. And it has been ribbon cut. I was also unable to attend that. In both cases, I was out of town. I will have a proper senior board report next time around, and I'll be making those meetings from here on.
Yep, the awesome Friends of the Senior Center and the van. If you get a chance to see it, it was pretty awesome. Several of us were there for that ribbon cutting, so that was cool. And Councillor Carey, I know you attended an event yesterday that I was unable to attend, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Day before yesterday.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and members of the council. I, along with Councilor Lopez, attended the ribbon cutting for the Dallas Family Shelter that they were sort of dedicating yesterday, and that will be open tomorrow. I went over because it's operated by Church at the Park, and that's the organization that will be operating the Monmouth shelter here when that comes online, which could be within 3 months. That's kind of their target. So I wanted to see what we could sort of expect in terms of accoutrements and quality of construction and that sort of thing. And myself, and I would defer somewhat to Counselor Lopez on this, but I was very, very, very impressed with the physical structure, with the layout, with the concept. What it is, it's a small, modest home with a ground floor and a second floor. And there are 2 bedrooms on each floor. On the bottom floor, there's a common kitchen and laundry. The finishes are not extravagant, but they're very nice. They're certainly something that would elicit pride in the people that live there, that will be living there, albeit, probably short periods of time. And then upstairs, which will be the second family, will be living upstairs. And there are 2 bedrooms up there and a common area so they can have family time and a little reading nook and a television in both areas. So there'll be some common space, but there's also individual and private family type space, which I think is good. As I said, the finishes are nice, the appliances are good. The families that walk in there tomorrow will hopefully be filled with pride that's going to be where they're going to be for the next foreseeable time. They had a number of things they had to work through over there with the city of Dallas and some of their code and so forth, but it has been it has come to fruition really nice, and I'll have to say that it gave me renewed confidence in Church at the Park for the sort of facility that they can deliver. So it was encouraging.
Counselor Lopez, did you have anything to add? And Counselor McHugh, can you get your mic?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Carey, for that very comprehensive report of the space. I think you did it better than I could have. And I'll just add that, I was quite impressed by the responsiveness of the project to the community. Having seen this project progress over months and I believe years from its original design phase, it looks wildly different now at implementation than it did in the original proposal. And having heard a lot of community feedback about what the community felt like they wanted, what they felt like would fit, what would be born in that space, this looks like what those descriptions were. Helping families, scaled back so that it's right-sized for rural communities, in partnership with rural partners, not holding the burden of, and this is words from, I went back and looked at some of the town halls, burden of serving homelessness of all Polk County in one site, having multiple sites, sites that fit specific needs of community members that we see in our neighborhoods, in our towns, families in this case that need support. And I was really heartened to see how much this project had changed from its, proposal stage through the design and implementation stage. And it takes a lot to change programs that dramatically. And it takes a lot of communities coming together to work and discuss about what will fit and what will work. And so having seen it in person, it's very different thinking about it in concept, right? But having seen it in person, I'm excited to see how this can be a huge community resource for the time to come. So, thank you.
All right, no other boards and commissions I'm seeing. So that will take us to our city manager's report. Rochelle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to start my report off this evening with asking our Chief Haynes to come up. This is to give the count, he's going to be able to, he's going to be presenting some information regarding federal immigration enforcement, and to give the council the opportunity to ask questions, so.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of council. As the city manager just alluded to, she asked me today to come in here and speak about this, I think really in light of probably the executive orders that were signed by the president recently that speak about immigration enforcement. And I think really, and just to shed light on what that means for us and what we'll do, what you can expect from your local law enforcement. And I'll start off by kind of pointing to the fact that, nearly 40 years ago, Oregon, passed House Bill, I wrote it down here, 2314, declaring that Oregon is a sanctuary state. And really what that means and what that act did was that it prohibited state and local law enforcement from assisting in helping with federal immigration authorities. Furthermore, and I'll kind of fast forward now, to 2017, 2018, there's a lot of discussion, but Monmouth, passed its own inclusivity ordinance that speaks to the same thing and it really affirms the sanctuary state status. So I think that you were also provided a memorandum, a training memorandum, and this was not necessarily supposed to be a public, document. We'll say that it was really for our law enforcement, personnel to focus on. But I'll tell you that I think it's important, and really what I would outline by this is that, they're almost all law enforcement agencies in some way, shape, or form are a part of either OACP or the OSSA, the Sheriff's Association. And so this does speak to all of those agencies. And have stakeholders from all of those agencies in there. And so what you'll see in there is kind of the things that we can do, by law, and the things that we cannot do. Many of the things maybe don't apply to Monmouth because we don't have a jail and we don't do some of these functions. But the main thing, and what I think you can take from this, is that we're still bound by state law, and so we will not be assisting, with the immigration, or federal immigration authorities if they, were to call our office and ask for information on, it could be residences or names or those kind of things. We can't comply with that, by law. And so there are things that are spelled out in here that are, if it's a matter of a records or a public records request that anybody can have. There is some gray area there on what we could provide, but also one of the things that we've done that you'll see outlined later in this memorandum is we have kind of a checkbox, on these our records request forms that do that basically ask the question, is this request for the purpose of detecting or apprehending persons for the purpose of enforcing federal immigration laws? We put that on our forms. I think it's been about a year and a half or 2 years ago. It's already in place. And if we get that request, it's something that we have to decline, and then we have to make that report to the Criminal Justice Commission, let them know that we had the request and that we declined their request, and there's a report, on that. So I think what I would just like to say is that we will not be helping the federal, law enforcement or ICE doing any kind of immigration enforcement here. One thing I will also note is that we also can't obstruct them from or interfere with them doing their lawful duties. And so, I think there's probably a lot of what if scenarios, and that's kind of what came up as I sat through the meeting with OACP and the Sheriff's Association as people had these questions. But, I have started to have some of those conversations with our partners. I just had a conversation today with the Associate Director at Western Oregon University, Hanson, with their Public Safety Department, and we talked about what this would look like and or lack of what it would look like, I'll say, being that we're not going to be doing much. The only time you'll probably see Monmouth PD involved in something like this was if we received a call for service and it was a matter of, kind of a life safety type issue that resulted in this that we had to respond to as a public safety thing, but not related to, again, directly to the immigration or enforcement in that way. So I know I kind of probably encompassed a lot of things, maybe didn't speak to a lot of things very specifically, but hopefully I'm at least clear with what you can expect from us. And then if there's questions I can answer, I'd be happy to. And if there's questions of Lane, I will say also.
I was just going to say,
it-
since one of the things
Yes.
is this is not legal advice,
Yeah.
seek guidance from your legal advisor.
And I did,
I thought if anybody would like to put Lane on the spot as well.
Well, if you like, I'll put myself preemptorily on the spot. Yeah, and, I reviewed this both for the city of Dallas and also for Chief Haynes, and I think there's no question that this is an area that is going to be, that we're going to see a lot of activity in the coming months. And, there is certainly the latest executive orders have put Oregon and other sanctuary states and cities in the crosshairs of a different federal direction. But the question here is whether to follow Oregon law, which is established and does carry penalties for violation, or to make an anticipatory change to violate state law because there may be a change in the federal response to these state laws. And I think until we know more clearly where and how strongly the federal government is going to be coming down on this, it really behooves the city to continue to follow state law. And again, I will say, we'll see action on this, and there'll be litigation at the federal level about this, and we will have to respond to that. But for the time being, it's a prospect of changes at the federal level versus what we have in the way of settled Oregon law that is accompanied by penalties for violation. And my advice to the chief was to continue to follow state law.
And I know you're not a constitutional lawyer, but I'm kind of curious. An executive order, my extremely minimal understanding, pertains to the executive branch of the federal government. It's not a law because it was not passed by Congress. It's not an enacted law.
Okay, we'll get you signed up for testimony in one of the district court cases. But of course, in part, states have existed somewhat at the pleasure of the federal government, basically in not challenging these sanctuary statutes and laws. And I think what I understand the impetus in the executive order to be is really a directive to Department of Justice and other federal agencies to actually challenge these. The federal government has tolerated these for the past several years because, it does direct agencies not to comply with agencies of federal law. And to the extent that the president has authority to direct federal agencies to change their status of just basically allowing these things to exist, you could see some enforcement actions by the federal government that would challenge the legality of these state and local statutes that are at odds with federal government. Again, it's just existed. They've existed just by convention and over the past several years. That may change, and if it does, we'll have to respond.
And not us. I mean, they guess they could pick Monmouth, Oregon instead of
We probably
Portland,
will not be the
Oregon,
test
but
case. Yeah.
I'm thinking they'll go after bigger fish than us. All right, thank you. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Reed.
Chief, can you speak to the topic of warrants, what types of warrants, what they are, what types of warrants there are, and what your response would be to those, just to clarify so people know where local law enforcement stands?
Yeah, there are several kinds of warrants, and I think this speaks to mostly arrest warrants, especially for immigration, violations. And if we did have an arrest warrant that was signed by a federal judge, for said violations, we could make that arrest, but not, there are warrants that are, that are not signed by a judge or that could come straight from ICE, by an agent, and we would not be able to enforce any of those. So again, unless it's something signed by a federal judge, it's nothing that we would be enforcing. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and just to clarify that if there is a warrant that's valid, that's signed by a judge, a federal judge, that you must arrest, there's not discretion, is that?
Correct. On most warrants, and especially signed by a judge, it is a shall arrest. There is no discretion for law enforcement, but again, that's when we would take enforcement, is if we have something signed by a federal judge in this case.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor McKeel.
Thank you very much, Chief Haynes, for bringing this up. We've had lots of people worried how Monmouth is going to react, so this is incredibly good timing. I do have a question about and you might not know, about the sanctity that had in the past of schools and churches, I think medical clinics, maybe food pantries, I don't know if they're in there as well. But do we have a sense of how those establishments might be still protected or not violated? Yeah, and I guess it's happening now with this new policies.
I would probably have to defer to Lane or somebody because I don't have the answer for that.
And I have not studied that. My understanding is, again, the federal government has basically declined enforcement in the case of a sanctuary in a church or school. That really is by federal policy not to enforce. And there's been a directive to change that policy. So you may see that. It won't be by the local police, but it would be by ICE and other federal agencies, either in the schools or in the churches. And that's really totally on their own. That's not involving Chief Haynes and his police.
So there's nothing we can do locally to protect those institutions.
I'm going to say not. Yeah.
I can tell you they are developing responses. Counselor Carey?
And this is more question for Lane and then hopefully reassurance for the chief. But if there are threats of federal penalties being associated with, with sanctuary states, people that may be involved with with following state law, my assumption is that our officers would be held harmless on anything like that. And if that's the case, then it might be worth assuring them that they would be,
Yeah, they would be. I think probably what you'll see in way of enforcement or action by the federal government is more likely a risk to federal funding for states, for instance, that style themselves as sanctuary states. More likely it'll be that kind of thing where the funding to the states, and in some cases funding to individual agencies, would be cut off. That's probably what you see more than actions directed against individual officers.
I guess in part I was thinking there could be, threats made by federal agents against a particular officer that we need this or we're going to arrest you, and for that officer to be confident that they had protection.
Yeah. If an officer is
might make it
following,
easier.
if an officer is following state law and city policies and law, they would be indemnified by the city.
Yeah, and I can say that our staff, I think, feel comfortable with that. I think the only thing that, where you might see, where you could see, potential violations or action against an officer would be if they were, again, interfering or obstructing. But they're pretty clear on this, and I just spoke about it at our shift briefing today before I left. We talked about it again. We have a staff meeting tomorrow. We'll have everybody in there and we'll really kind of go through this and talk about it, make sure that everyone's on the same page and that we know what we're supposed to do, I think legally and morally and just, again, make sure we're on the same page.
And Madam Mayor, if I could just make clear my response to Carol's question, is there anything we can do? I mean, we, the city, yeah, in terms of creating a sanctuary space for schools or churches. No, there's nothing for the city to do in that regard.
Chief Haynes, I just have one last question, because you mentioned that the police department wouldn't come up and join an ICE raid or roundup unless there was a safety issue. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because it's created a little question that it's like I should ask.
Yeah, I think when I say safety issue, and this is kind of one of those what if scenarios, what could happen, but if there was a disturbance, we'll say to the level that we felt, again, there was weapons involved or there was further threat of violence, and I don't know what that would look like. Again, I'm kind of making this up as I go, but if we have reports of shots fired, or that there's a physical fight of some kind, or those kind of things, that would require a response from us, just to make sure that, more than anything, that the scene is safe and that there is no, loss of life or things like that we may be able to stop. But I think where I don't want to assume where you're getting to, but if ICE was there legally and under their authority, and they were performing their duties, and somebody was resisting arrest, that doesn't mean that we're going to necessarily go. But if it was to the point where things were out of control and there was a kind of riotous behavior, those kind of things, we may have to again make the scene safe. But it's not that we're trying to go and assist ICE with immigration enforcement. It's just that we still have certain obligations, to protect our community and our residents. So.
All right, seeing no other questions, thank you so much. I know these are conversations going on above you, around you, and below you, and I really appreciate your response and letting us know, Chief. Thank you. And Lane, thank you for your expertise on this as well. So, Rochelle, other city manager items?
Just to add one comment onto that. So today at our management meeting, we spoke with all the directors regarding the situation. And then afterwards, Isaiah, we went and spoke with any front desk staff so that they're also aware of the situation and how things should be handled if anyone were to come to City Hall. So I just want to let you know that we were trying to communicate that with staff. Let's see. So this past week, I attended City Day at the Capitol, and Councilor Bells attended it with me. We had meetings with Senator Patterson and Representative Evans, and we went with the City of Independence to go. And so it was a great time to get together and talk about LOC priorities, and then to also talk about current projects for Monmouth. So through Representative Evans, and this is for state funding, it's called the Christmas Tree Bill. A lot of it is lottery funds. We have applied for several projects. We have applied for $2 million for the My Trolley Rural Transit operations. We have applied for $1.4 million for the recycled water site development, and that is the sewer project you referenced in the budget section. We also applied for $500,000 for the senior center kitchen renovation. And my thought on this was, the total project cost is $1.25 million. We're going to be going through Representative Salinas's office for $750,000 of that, but there is usually a 20 to 25% match. And so this 500 was to take care of that match so that we don't have to come up with those funds. We also submitted $1.2 million for Riddle Road transportation improvements to support needed housing development. This is actually the road development that will then help phase 2 go into production. And then also $1.8 million for sewer and water upgrades for the East Gwynn Street extension. The project is another $1.3 million for the road and sidewalks and all of that. We actually have the funding in our budget to complete that project with urban renewal dollars. But the thought was, if we can pull in $1.8 million for the water and sewer, then we can use $1.8 million in urban renewal for another project. And then also $500,000 to begin the design on a new power substation. On the congressional direct spending side, as I mentioned, the senior center renovation, and then also the regional water treatment plant design. So we will be partnering with the City of Independence. The applications will actually go through Independence. So anyway, that's going to be 5 million we're going to be asking for on that side. The actual planning and design of a new regional water treatment plant is between 10 and 11 million. But this will get the process started. And so with that, then we have the senior center kitchen. So those will be the two that we go for through congressional direct spending. I also wanted to mention that Representative Evans has 4 bills dealing with measures 5 and 50. There's HB 2321, HB 2333, HB 2334, and HB 2335. And the 2335 bill it sets up a task force with representatives and senators at the state level to look at the impacts of 5 and 50 on the revenues that cities are getting. So it's super, super important. The League of Oregon Cities put a mass email out to get support for that. When I was meeting with Senator Patterson, I asked her if she would support Representative Evans' bill. And so hopefully we can get something going on the 5 and 50 to help cities have, deal with the property tax revenue issue. The Monmouth Police Department is partnering with the Independence Police Department, and they're doing a high school CTE program, which will run through May. It's starting this week. They will be doing tours and training and mock interviews for high school students, so they really can kind of get a picture of what it would be like to be a police officer. The Monmouth Municipal Court is offering an amnesty program. And this is to forgive a portion of fines and collections. And this will run from February 15th through April 15th. And they'll receive a 50% credit if they pay it in full. And so we're hoping, we have about $300,000 sitting at collection agencies. And so hopefully people will take advantage of this and be able to get their fines taken care of. Let's see, I have accepted an invitation to be on the budget committee for the Mid-Willamette Valley Council of Governments. So it's a one-day meeting, which was, and then just to go into some dates. So the Monmouth Strategic Goal Refresh will be Friday, February 28th from 3 to 7 p.m. and dinner will be provided. The Elected Essentials training is tomorrow at 8:15 at the LOC offices. Monmouth Independence Chamber of Commerce 60th Anniversary Community Awards will be the February 27th. The town hall for the first quarter will be on Thursday, March 6th. And the focus of that will be strategic goal updates. Dress Like Fred Day will be March 20th. Again, we're excited about that this year. And that's actually the same day as the State of the Cities event, which will be at the Independence City Hall. So that's all I have. Also, we also included some flyers for you on the table. So you have the Black History Month celebration information, and then an Earth Summit information. She dropped that off today and asked that the city council receive that. So you have that information. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you very much. A question for the city manager, yes?
Yeah, we had a discussion, a good one with Chief Haynes, and we talked about all of the things, and you mentioned that what we've done with the city. Are there any things that we can do to be a resource for other, what I would consider vulnerable areas? Now, he referenced talking to the university, so there's some coordination there, and we have to be careful, I suppose, about too much coordination, but I'm concerned about target-rich areas like Total Health, like our resource center. Carol mentioned food banks, MES, the schools. I wonder if there's not a coordinated information, nonpartisan, just this is what it is, and this is how we can help and how we can't help. I know that the Total Health people, they're working, they're making some plans of their own, but they're kind of, running in the dark a little bit, I think. So whether or not the city could provide any leadership in education, I think it would be wise if we could, but I'll just leave it at that. I'm not asking for any commitment or response, but I just think you know, we are a leader in the community, and so information that we have should be shared, in my mind.
That brings us to council comments, and I would not normally do this, but I'm going to start this evening, if you recognize me. And I'd like to start by reading a few lines that were delivered 92 years ago at the first inauguration of President Franklin Roosevelt at the peak of the Great Depression. He said, "I am certain that my fellow Americans expect that I will address them with a candor and a decision which the present situation of our people impel. This is preeminently the time to speak the whole truth, the truth frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This is a great nation that will endure as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." I think, as we've alluded to, as many of us know, individually in our workplaces, we are living in a world of fear right now. Fear that is fomented by current leadership. There's a particular class of people in this country who are made to fear for their power, their influence, and their status. All others are made to fear for their safety, their livelihoods, their health care, their education, and their homes. As a city, we are looking at various services we provide to our residents that might be federally funded. We are concerned about potential impoundment of funds that we need to make improvements to our infrastructure in order to relieve burden on our future tax ratepayers. We are very concerned that the existing social safety net for many in our community will fail. And as is happening now, we, as the city, will bear the burden of a community facing increased economic hardship, food insecurity, and houselessness. Let me be clear. The chaotic decisions being announced out of Washington, D.C. could affect everyone in this city, let alone our partners such as Western Oregon University and the Central School District. So amid this uncertainty and chaos, I hold to the words of another statesman, actually one who is often confused with FDR as the source of the quote about fear. But what Winston Churchill said is fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. So I've made that decision. I promise to have the courage to advocate for and to fight for this community and for its people as part of my oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States of America and the state of Oregon. Other comments? Councilor Lopez.
Madam Mayor, thank you for those words. Your words are those of a true leader, and I'm honored to serve with you. I will join you in making that oath to the Constitution, to our town, and to our neighborhood and our community. I would like to take a moment in that spirit to read an excerpt from Resolution 1833, resolution declaring the city of Monmouth an inclusive city. This is a resolution that Chief Haynes had so well referenced earlier in his remarks. And before I do, I would like to state that our identity, our values, those core beliefs, I believe, are coming into jeopardy as individuals. I can speak about families and my family. I can speak in that same way to teams and groups. And I believe that our city's values and beliefs are coming under fire. That's why we write things down. That's why we pass resolutions. That's why we craft these things when we are clear of mind and clear of purpose, so that they can stand as cornerstones when the world is chaotic around us. So I will not read the entirety of this resolution. It is a couple pages long. However, I will read an excerpt from the second page. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Monmouth that the City of Monmouth is an inclusive city that embraces, celebrates, and welcomes all people without regard to race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, age, sexual orientation, gender and gender identification, national origin or perceived national origin, immigrant and refugee status, veteran status, or disability. That the City Council of the City of Monmouth is committed to standing together with the people of Monmouth in opposing acts of intolerance committed against community members. That the provision of services or benefits by the city shall not be conditioned upon any resident's federal immigration status, except as required by federal or state law. By federal or state law. Upon their race, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status, age, sexual orientation, gender and gender identification, national origin or perceived national origin, veteran status, or disability. These are powerful words. This is more than just a line in the sand. This is a flag that we fly proudly. Thank you.
Counselor McKee.
I just want to also thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilor Lopez, for those really great words. But I'm just going to talk about the Black History Month program that's coming up in a couple weeks. So, you know, because we can make our town feel good for a lot of people. So Black History Month, it'll be Thursday, February 20th, 6:30 to 8. It's going to be at the Senior and Community Center. And our beloved Mayor Coons is going to give the opening for that. But we're actually going to have a really good program this year. I don't know if you came last year. It was a tough program. This year we actually have a performance of the Lift Every Voice and Sing that will also be included with poetry readings. And we have a speaker that we had 4 years ago is coming back. She's going to do another great talk. And we will have very special dessert refreshments. So yeah, I know you don't come for the refreshments, but yeah, come for the refreshments. And we also have our free drawing of $10 gift certificates of Black-owned businesses. So lots of amazing reasons to be at the Black History Month celebration this year. I just want to give a shout out to Mr. Wade and his crew at the Power and Light for putting up the Black History Month flags that are up on the streetlight poles now. We live in an amazing city. We are just so lucky to have such wonderful people here. And along with that, I don't know that you saw, we have the 17 classes that have displayed their kids' artwork. And now we have a display here in the City Hall. So I'm very excited for that. So we're going to celebrate this month very well. That's all I have.
Counselor Opers.
I'm going to lighten it up even a little more. So we're in the middle of two projects at home. One's installing a generator after my spouse went through Hurricane Beryl in Houston. The other is a bathroom remodel. That has involved city staff. And when you have a 30-year-old or a 60-year-old water meter and valves, they tend to get sticky. And the morning that the plumbers came to shut off water, it was not behaving, and the city staff showed up in very short order and took care of issues for us. They wound up being larger than initially anticipated, but it was done quickly and professionally, and then put back together in a way that you can't really tell anything was done. And then this morning at 8:10, I had a knock on my door, and it was Power and Light coming to disconnect my entire house. And he asked, "Are you ready to have your power shut off?" I said, "No." He said, "I'll be back in half an hour." And he was. And they shut us off. I literally disconnected the house from the city line while we had the necessaries for this generator done. And then we left the house, needless to say, for the day. Came home and everything was hooked back up, and you'd never know they were there. So I just wanted to say thanks to those two departments in specific. The entire city government, as far as I'm concerned, is filled with amazing employees. But the folks who came by my house in the last 2 weeks have done exemplary work and with smiles on their faces the whole way. And I really appreciate the folks we have.
Does the generator have an extra meter? Do we get another public safety fee out of you?
No, it comes in after the meter. I guess I could run it and run electricity backwards and supply the city, running the meter backwards. I don't know if that works or not.
I probably not.
I think I would lose money on the deal.
Yeah, right. All right. And Councilor McKeel?
All right, are we ready for the land acknowledgement? Okay, thank you. We would like to acknowledge that indigenous tribes and bands have been on the lands here and throughout Oregon since time immemorial. It is not lost on us that the Willamette Treaty forcibly removed these peoples from their homelands in 1855 to 1856, the year that the city of Monmouth was founded. We recognize the pre-existing and the continued sovereignty of the federally recognized tribes that are a vibrant part of this region today, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, and thank them for sharing their perspective on how we might care for one another and the land so it can take care of us. We commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands.
All right, and that leads us to one last motion. Who wants it?
I move that we adjourn.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And in case Phyllis has to record it, any nays? All right, we're adjourned.